Hot healthcare topics.
Healthcare hot topics.
Healthcare hot topics.
That's good. Healthcare hot topics. I saw yesterday that in the big NFL case with the durable medical equipment, that two of the defendants pled guilty. That's pretty quick, right? Was it less than 3 weeks after arraignment? So I think that the government must be putting a lot of pressure on those folks and maybe giving them an opportunity which won't be there overnight.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, in many of these cases, when the indictment is unsealed, they will already have that guilty plea worked out with 1, 2, maybe more defendants,
Right.
And they're ready to file a guilty plea or call for a change of plea hearing as soon as the case is initiated, which puts a lot of pressure on those co-defendants to think about pleading guilty and maybe cooperating with the government in their case.
Also, many times the attorneys for these people that pled guilty, they've been negotiating with the government months prior to the indictment being handed down. So once either a subpoena is issued or a CID is issued, we start working with the government, and probably we are communicating with the government even to turn themselves in. So once basically the indictment comes down, usually you already negotiated with the government, and probably you could have entered a plea at that point in time. So that makes sense.
Do you guys think in a case like this where it's a high publicity, big notoriety, that the government does things differently? Or, I mean, some of these guys are guys that when you follow NFL football, Joe Horn, remember the receiver for he played for New Orleans?
Yeah.
I mean, they had a couple local players here. What do you think? How do they treat a case like that?
Well, I was just talking to a retired FBI agent today, and he said that, these task forces, they get an unlimited pot of money to play with almost from the government, but that comes with an increased accountability. So I've got to imagine when there's a case as high profile as this one, with people watching,
Right.
that they really want to make a statement and make sure that those plea deals aren't too sweetheart. Because there's a fear on the government side that if they look soft on healthcare fraud, it's going to, encourage people to commit
Right.
it. So I think one of the most important things you'll see out of this case is the government will be less likely to budge on reducing the loss amount in the sentence for even those people who plead guilty. That being said, you may get some relatively lenient sentences from those judges when those sentencing cases come down the pipeline.
Yeah, I agree.
I was always curious, I am, when how do cases start? And I saw in this one, the insurance companies tipped off the government because of the large amount of the requested reimbursements. There was something like some of those cryo chambers, or some of the defendants were trying to submit claims for just things out of the ordinary. And then I think it was either Aetna or Cigna tipped off the government, and that's how they started the investigation. Yeah. So I found that kind of curious.
And many times those cases start in a civil matter, and Cigna and Aetna is trying to recoup the money back. But when they go into discovering the civil case, they find out emails or evidence that basically turn it into a criminal case. And then the insurance company will refer it to the criminal authorities and or the federal government, because they have all the resources. So the government is basically doing their work for them at the end of the day. And it's something that you see a lot.
Was there any evidence that this case started as a result of a key tam, a relator trying to take an allegation to the government?
If so, they haven't made that public yet. It was just a general statement that the insurance company noticed some irregularities, and then they decided to follow up with law enforcement.
And so many of these cases may start as a result of an allegation by somebody involved in the scheme or an employee who realized something was going awry. But when an insurance company originates the allegation, typically that's as part of their own compliance mechanism to try to root out fraud and then report it to the federal government. And I would offer a tip to those potential fraudsters out there: when you start doing things that are in excess of what your peers are doing, you're really going to cause a lot of attention to yourself and potentially be looked at by the federal government.
Yeah, private insurance company, the software that they have, obviously the federal government software, but if you're billing 10 times while your competitor is billing, that's going to be a red flag, and you're going to get audited immediately. So that's a sign. Also, I think you mentioned if if the people watching, we mentioned relator or key time, we want to explain that it's a whistleblower lawsuit. And it's important to mention that they come around a lot because the whistleblower, the relator, get 30% of what the government recovers. So there's cases, and big cases of pharmaceutical whistleblowers that they have blown the whistle for 130 million. The pharmaceutical end up settling. Usually we get 50% and the relator 15%, but that's other ways that these cases can come about.
And this is kind of off topic from the NFL issue, but the real way to prevent that whistleblower from being inside your healthcare practice or your healthcare entity is having a compliance program in place,
Right.
making sure that you have some sort of auditing and monitoring mechanism in place, so that even if there is a whistleblower that spots an issue, when the government comes looking and they look at your practice, they look at your facility to see how you're billing and coding, you can say, listen, I understand some things slipped by, but the reality is that we were doing our best to try to root out fraud, right?
I mean, how many times have we had clients say, I wish I knew this then,
Yeah.
right? They said, if I knew about a strong compliance program, if I knew I could have come to Chapman and I could have had the lawyers set me up to be on the right path, we wouldn't be in this position that we are now.
So what are we thinking about in terms of years for these NFL players, just ballpark, if we had to predict it?
I mean, if you're looking, you're looking at some of this. I mean, the lost value. I mean, this equipment. Some of it was $100,000 each one piece. I mean, I think you're looking at some of these well-known guys could be doing double digits.
Double-digit jail.
Yeah.
Wow.
It all depends in the loss amount and how if you have good lawyers like ourselves that can fight that amount and lower and reduce that number, you're probably going to end up doing a lot less time in prison.
That's where the fight's going to be. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out.
I think one of the issues that I think a lot of them were surprised and they weren't prepared. Even though you're a former NFL guy, you've had financial advisors, you always think it can't happen to me. And the way I read what transpired in this case, it doesn't look like a lot of them were prepared. Maybe they had an idea that there was an investigation going on, but they didn't hire counsel. Maybe they waited until next thing you know, the marshals were at their house and they were dragged into court.
And one last thing, and it's in Florida, I see it all the times with my client. They call me out and they say, Mr. Santos, everybody was doing it. Well, that doesn't make it legal, all right? And I see it in Florida specifically many times when all these groups are doing the same thing. And I say, well, if he's doing it, he's been doing it for a year or 2 years. When you get into that business arrangement that it's illegal, probably that's when the feds are going to come in and break the scheme. So you got to be careful.
And you mentioned surprise, and I'm not surprised by the surprise in this case, because when you're dealing with a conspiracy like this, with reaching a whole bunch of powerful people who have the ability to hire counsel and play some pretty good defense, no pun intended, right?
That's good.
You end up with a federal government that wants to hit this case as quickly as possible without the word spreading that they're engaged in an investigation, because they don't want people destroying documents. They don't want people lawyering up too quickly. They want to get people in and get them to make a statement by potentially arresting them and using those few vital hours after the arrest to get them to talk. And I think that they wanted to proceed with that violence of action, that sort of shock and awe against these NFL guys, because they knew that everybody's going to lawyer up. Everybody's going to go get the most talented people in these offices over here and in this office. And when that happens, the government's going to have an uphill battle in trying to get the case off the ground.
Yeah, it will be interesting to watch how it all shakes out.
Let's see how much yardage the federal government's going to get out of this.
Or if it goes to overtime.
And if there's a whistleblower that gets 30%, that will be interesting.
Yeah.
I think the civil case.
Not a bad windfall. Well, thanks for
Thank you
joining
for your
us for this episode of Hot Healthcare Topics.
Healthcare hot topics.
Healthcare Hot Topics. That's what I said. Yeah.
Have a good night. Perfect. That was great.
I think that
John started with that.